Scientific peer review is one of the most important aspects of modern life. Because of it, we have modern science, technology, medicine, and all kinds of products and services that make our lives astonishingly better than those of previous generations. Scientific findings and their publication in scientific journals can tremendously impact the quality of our life. However, various problems exist in scientific peer review, which unfortunately affect the progress of research in many ways, and I would like to present and discuss some of them here. Hello everyone, live from China Medical University in the Institute of Biomedical Science. My name is Dan, and I am with Brian today, as usual, and we would like to talk about a topic of importance or significance, especially in the research and scientific field, and that is of the issues with publications and expert peer review. Now, oftentimes we're dealing with the problem, especially in publishing research, of time. What do I mean by that is that whenever we submit manuscripts for publication, sometimes it may take up to 2 years, perhaps even more, from the time that the research was completed and it's actually published. Now, you can imagine the impact that has on the entire world in terms of scientific findings, and what does it mean to have findings that are published right away versus findings that are published years later.
So this is an area where I'm just flabbergasted that it takes 2 years. So in Taiwan, in 2 years, the world's largest foundry, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, they can do a whole shrink in 2 years. They can make every circuit on in everything 30% smaller in 2 years. And I believe 2 years is also how long it takes to get a patent. And we discussed this a little earlier, and another topic that came up for your 2-year publication cycle is that there's no record of who came up with an idea first. So
right.
You may be first, and somebody else publishes the same or a similar idea, but there's no concept like in patents where you have first to publish or first to invent. It doesn't even seem like people are tracking on this issue.
Yeah, that's actually another issue, because let's say you have been reading up on some literature or scientific studies, and usually in their discussion section or conclusion or future research, they may say, okay, this might be something that should be done to enhance or to get some other information or ideas or results in the future. So maybe they might not do that themselves, but they're making suggestions, perhaps sometimes hoping that other research labs would do that. So of course, let's say that I or someone else decides to, okay, I'm gonna try to focus on this area. I know their study, I know their results. Maybe if I do what they suggest, I can get some really interesting stuff. And a lot of times, labs, they make suggestions for changing some parameters or increasing the population size or doing this or doing that. It's because they don't always have all the resources they need in their lab or in their country or what have you. So people that have the resources or live in a place with a demographic enabling them to continue on those previous studies. It's like sitting on a gold mine sometimes, right? But here's the thing: you might pick up on that idea. You might have the resources. Somebody else in some other lab might pick up on that idea, and they may have the resources. They may have the demographics. They may have whatever it is they need for that particular study. Now, you don't know of this other lab or this other people that are doing the research, or these other researchers, and they don't know of you, and there might be somebody else somewhere else. I mean, look at, for example, Watson's and Crick, right?
Yeah.
There were like a bunch of different people working on the same topic back then. It was to come up with the structure of the double helix, the DNA, right? And at least these people, they all knew of each other. They all knew, like, hey, there's a bunch of different labs working on this. This is a hot topic. It's just a matter of who comes up with the model first. And they just happened to be the lucky ones, you know. I mean, there were quite a few other labs that were just almost right there with them. And it's the same thing with many other labs around the world. So here comes the problem with publishing, because there's this bottleneck to where when you submit, it takes, because we're using a very traditional system, to where, and on top of that, you can only submit to one journal at a time, and this is a big problem. This is where all the bottlenecking comes. I don't understand why, with all the technology we have today, and I was making some earlier references to using AI in the future to hasten our publications. And I'm just going to give you one example from one of my submissions. So I submit to a journal, but before we get to that, let's also talk about the real issue, which sort of like springs up all this myriad or millions of other issues. So, in order for you to get good funding, you need to publish in a very good journal or a high impact factor journal. Now, impact factor means, okay, based on how popular the journal is, based on the kind of significant studies they publish, based on how long the journal has been around, how familiar researchers and scientists are with it. There's, quite a lot of factors that combine together to make up good ranking or good impact factor. So, with that in mind, we submit to the highest impact factor journals that we can. And of course, most of the time they can make a pretty quick decision to let you know that they're interested in your manuscript or not. So they usually take up to about 3 to 5 days to do what is called a desktop reject. So a desktop reject is, okay, they look at your study and they think, okay, we have so many submissions and the study is just okay, it's not outstanding, or it's not like, wow. So they'll reject it, and then you go to the next in line. So another journal with a little bit lower impact factor, hoping that you can get through. Now, the problem starts when you pass the desktop reject, and then it goes to the next stage, because once it starts going to a few different review stages, they may decide to reject it during the last stage of review. Like, okay, your study is really good, but you're not really within the scope of our publications or topics and so on and so forth. And this is kind of ironic, because sometimes you send to a journal where your topic is a lot more has a lot more in common with the scope of the journal than many other studies that have already been published. And so anyway, the problem is you get rejected after like 2 or 3 months. So then your study is already 4 months old at this point. So you submit to the next journal, and maybe the same thing happens. You get to the 3rd or 4th stage, and you get rejected again. So your study is getting older and older. So that's what happened to one of my studies. By the time he got accepted, and by the time it was actually published, he ended up being about 2 years old. Now, with all the technology we have today, and experimenting with AI and algorithms and all sorts of things, and really, really improved information systems and whatnot, we should not have these kind of problems that we're having today with studies taking such a long time to be accepted and published. And I think I've mentioned at some point that why don't we have kind of like a reverse auctioning, instead of kind of like a traditional auctioning of papers. So for example, you put your paper out there online or on the internet or on a platform, and the first journal that's interested, you can make a decision if you want to give it to this bidder, because they're kind of like bidding for your article, right? Or if you want to wait around to see if you get a better offer, like a higher impact factor journal and whatnot.
So if you go down low enough on the impact factor to more obscure journals, they're actually looking for the best articles they can get.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So if you had some public method of offering these things, maybe they need to be watermarked or date stamped or some kind of the cryptocurrency technology, whatever that's called. So this is the paper as published on this date.
Mm-hmm.
So for credit purposes, I mean, and then after that, journals could bid on it. But it should be closed and established and what have you.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Then I could see the journals bidding, and the most obscure journals would start the bidding, and then if something attracted attention, it would become more popular. Another model that might work, it just occurs to me, and maybe you might find some criticism with this, but I'm wondering if a Wikipedia kind of model would work, and maybe Wikipedia, where the editorial staffs of various groups are the people who get to edit the wiki, and maybe whatever floats to the top of the wiki could be published journal style. I mean, there's got to be a way to do this where it doesn't take 2 years.
Absolutely, yeah. I think with the technology and the kind of information systems we have nowadays and the databases and whatnot, we definitely should enhance or completely improve and radicalize the way we're doing publications. And the main issue is that we're doing this. We're using humans to do this. This is the main issue. So, for example, because I used to do this, I used to review for a couple of journals in the past, and so I used to be a desktop reviewer. So for example, I used to look at all the papers that our journal was particularly interested in. So then we can only accept maybe 10-15% of all the submissions, which is pretty much the case with all good journals or decent journals out there, and journals with an impact factor or a certain within a certain group. So you have The two main groups are the SCI or Science Citation Index and SSCI, Social Science Citation Index. And if your journal belongs to either one of those, it's going to be highly attractive to the researchers, because this is how you get your funding. You've got to publish in either of those two groups. So the problem is everything's done by humans, and you know, one other problem is a lot of times I would get papers that were not my particular domain or field, right? So I would have to quickly judge just from the reading the title and the abstract with the results and whatnot, and maybe look into the references to see if this is something that's hot or suitable for our journal. And a lot of times, not only me, but most of the reviewers out there, we're not experts in everything. So it's going to be very hard for us to always make the 100% right decisions. I was talking to a guy from Nature, and he said, one of our reviewers, he desktop rejected a paper that was published in Science that he would have made great news if it was published in Nature. So that's what happens sometimes. You reject papers that are exactly what you want, good results, hot topic, but you have the reviewers that are just not able to spot everything, because they're like I said, they're not experts. So it's not that the reviewer is bad or anything, it's just he or she may not be familiar with the topic or subject. And this is a problem that could easily be overcome by AI, in my opinion.
Well, the whole thing could certainly be speeded up by AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So you mentioned before that you've read papers where the bibliography doesn't even accurately reflect the contents of the paper.
Yeah, absolutely. Because another problem is journals that are not so highly ranked, and they want to get there, but they're okay, but they want to do better. They can improve their ranking and their impact by how much they're cited, right? So what they do is they usually ask authors to consider finding some references or using some references from that particular journal, so it can help improve or increase the ranking. Now, what are you going to do? You're probably not going to find papers that are exactly related to your topic, so you're just going to cite anything you can find just to make the journal editor or the journal staff happy. And sometimes you'll be surprised the kind of references you find in a paper, like almost completely unrelated to what the author or the researcher is trying to publish. But it's something that you're asked to do, and you do it. Now, another problem with scientific publications of both kinds, science and social sciences, is who you know and who knows you, and whose back do you rub, and would they return the favor? Would they rub you back in return, right? Because all this is time is life. Okay, when you're in business, you usually say time is money. When you're in science, you say time is life, right? Because you can save a lot of lives if you can speed up your research, and of course money, right? So in science, we have two objectives rather than just money. Life is life and money, rather than just money. Okay, so you have this issue where, well, let's see, who's willing to rub my back? Okay, so you go out there to some journals, and they probably ask you to review for them before. So of course you're going to submit to them, and of course you want to try to make relationships with journals that publish things that you do research on, right? Things that you want to publish. So of course you want to make connections with them, and you review some papers for them, or you help them in one way or another. And then if you have some decent publication that fits within their scope, of course your chance of being that 15% that they can accept is much, much higher than if you're nobody up the street that they never heard of, right? Especially if you're like a beginning researcher, right? You haven't had a lot of publications, your name is not well known, and whatnot. So of course, you review a few papers for them, and then you submit to them. Now, they might reject you the first time because, it is what it is. But if you keep reviewing for them, and they keep rejecting you, at one point you're going to say, you know what, the hell with this, I'm not going to review for these guys anymore because they're just wasting my time. And that happened to me, so I'm speaking from experience. And the same thing, if this journal constantly publishes your research, right, or you have 3, 4, 5 papers in a good journal, right, you need to return the favor, right? If they're going to ask you, can you review a paper for us? You can't just say, you know what, I don't have time and whatever, because they might do the same thing. They might not decide to return the favor. So it's also this issue that further creates it adds to the problem of the bottleneck, because if there's so many journals out there, but it's the same like everywhere. It's who knows you and who do you know in order to get published in a decent journal. And I guess when you're famous enough and when your research is so darn outstanding that anybody would just any journal would just go crazy to publish your stuff, then you don't really need to worry about, okay, am I going to review for these guys? Do I need to rub their back? Because, then just having your research and your name in there is more than enough for them because of who you are and what you did or what you're doing. But when you just a medium sort of a researcher, where your stuff is pretty good, but so is everybody else's stuff, or so is most of other researchers' stuff. Theirs is pretty good. Then you have to worry about this, rubbing backs, and one hand washes the other and whatnot. So that this creates a lot of issues. It creates this bottlenecking and time, for you to get published, and so forth.
So it sounds like it's a situation. You've mentioned that the amount of research, the absolute amount of research, has increased remarkably in the last 10 or 20 years,
yes,
something like that.
Absolutely, it has exponentially increased because the wealth of the world has increased.
The rise of
China. And then of course you got more people now, right? The number of people have increased. The number of labs and universities have grown. I mean, think about it. There's so many universities and labs out there. In Taiwan, in particular, they want to close down some universities because they think, when at some point the government really wanted to invest into education, and they went about building so many schools that now, after the population stabilized and there's not so many offspring per family, now they're like, well, we got too many schools, let's close some of them down.
They have too many professors, they have too many researchers. Such a great problem to have.
So, that's good actually for international students, because now Taiwan is, they're kind of going out of the way to import students, especially from poor countries. They give great scholarships, but that's another topic that we're going to talk about. So today, basically, I just want to focus on the problems with scientific publications. And
so it seems to me, if I could summarize what I've picked up, the absolute number of publications for journals to publish has increased astronomically.
Yeah.
The number of respected journals can't go up very quickly because it
Right.
takes time for a journal to establish their reputation. And in addition to efforts which you've mentioned before, in which journals try to be unbiased, things like anonymizing the authors and so on, this is running parallel to an informal social structure, which also is involved in what is finally published and who interacts with the key people in a journal and whose work is seen immediately and so on. So you have a formal system which is extremely, what's the word? Unbiased, perhaps. And then you have you have a formal system that's extremely unbiased but can't possibly handle the capacity. Then you have an informal system which helps to get everything done, but is going to be biased by the normal human relations that are involved in everything.
Right.
And then you have a 2-year delay on top of everything else, while more and more people are doing more and more research faster and faster, and you don't have any system for establishing who deserves credit for things other than publication, whereas you may have come up with the idea first, your data may have been earlier and better, but you're not going to get any credit unless it's been published.
Yeah, and unfortunately you can't really patent it, because if you try to patent like a study, you have to disclose what you did, right? And so it's not published, but it's patterned, right? So then somebody can just say, well, I got connections, and I know some editors and whatnot. Why don't I do the study, and I'm pretty sure they'll publish it for me. So there's all these issues that
publishing and patenting aren't a perfect substitution.
It's just not going to work. Yeah. So, but there's also some other issues with, like you're saying, being biased, right? Like and asking for all this things that you're trying to do to journal, increasing the impact factor and whatnot. And I'm just thinking if we had AI to do the initial stages of review, then you're not going to find all this bias that you see currently. At least the first stage or two of the review process would be fair to everybody. Okay, because usually it's the first stage where the bias occurs. That's where, if you know the people and you've been rubbing their back and they're rubbing you, oh, here's this study and I think it fits your scope and I got some good results, then it's pretty much, it passes the desktop reject. So then it goes to the next stage and so on and so forth. So of course, if your study it's decent or it has good results and is substantially suitable, then of course it'd be much easier than you're going to get it done maybe in a month from the time you submit to the time you're being able to publish it. And then of course,
how long does it take now?
Well, it depends. It depends. I think it can take as little or as short as 3 weeks to a month, to probably still up to 2 years, depending on how many times you get rejected and you keep trying and so forth.
I don't know about what rejection means in scientific fields, but sometimes you're too early. In there are business cases where someone comes up with a product too early, so the parts are too expensive, so it's a failure. But it's a revolutionary product. Somebody does the same thing 2 years later, it's successful. Who should get credit? In a publishing environment, the first guy should get credit, but in an economic environment, the second guy gets money. So it's not clear to me that that the world is always ready for
Yeah.
an idea when it sees it.
Yeah, I think this can happen in scientific research as well. I'll give you one example. We're working on a study to see the impact of exosomes on cancer, right? Well, this wasn't a hot topic as
When
little
you
as
started?
so we just recently started focusing on them because we think that they can be used as markers and as treatment or as a process of cancer treatment and
Interesting.
whatnot. Now, 5-10 years ago, no, let's say 5 years ago, they started becoming more, and we started to learn more and more about exosomes. 10 years ago, they were non-factor. So if anybody published anything on exosomes 10 years ago, it might have got, it could have gotten some attention, but then because nobody else was doing anything with exosomes and nobody really knew,
Just
like,
like disappear, basically.
well, yeah, it would have just been like, okay, it's a hot topic, but it's an interesting topic, but it's not a hot topic. Now it's a hot topic, which means everybody's trying to do something with exosomes.
And the pioneers have given up on it already, probably. It's like, we published this for 5 years and no one paid any attention.
I know there's a guy that published a paper. He came and gave a speech at this university. He's actually from the US. So he was talking about how they're trying to educate exosomes how to change some behaviors. So if you can imagine that. Now, and this was like 4 years ago. So I don't know if they ever accomplished that or not. I assume they probably did something. I haven't seen any new publications from them on this topic, at least not recently. And I don't know if other labs are picking up on this same topic and trying to do the same thing they're doing. But the point is, yes, this could be similar to business, because if a topic is interesting but it's not hot and nobody else is doing anything with it, then how can you persuade your funders to give you more money to do more research on a topic it's not really hot? Nobody else really knows what to do with, right? But if this topic is hot and you know there's ways that people are thinking, okay, we can do this, we can do that, we can use them as markers, we can use them to find some pathways, or perhaps use it as a cocktail in cancer treatment and whatnot, then of course you're going to get more funding, and the better results you get, the more funding you get. It's kind of like with you know, business and economics, and you get more customers and they're more interested, then you make more money, and then you can invest more in this particular product or R&D to improve this product and whatnot.
Okay, so I'm familiar with very few topics on this, but I seem to remember that CRISPR-Cas9 was identified in the 1990s, but it didn't become, you know, the ultimate editing tool until much more recently.
So now they use it to, remember those twins in China that supposedly they're HIV resistant?
And
yeah,
coincidentally, their intelligence is enhanced apparently by the same thing.
So now it's popular, so that's a hot topic. So you get a lot of support and funding for the gene editing tool.
But initially it was just some observation that bacteria actually do have an immune system. Yeah. And it seemed to be stopping right there. It's like, oh gee whiz, they have an immune system. So what?
Another thing that I want to talk about, and I don't know if we should leave this for another one, but maybe we can start it now and then
finish it up. Half an hour, I think.
Finish it up at another time. Is when a study gets published in a very good journal, and this study, although it might have some good results, it ends up with erroneous or kind of ambiguous conclusion on the part of the researcher. And I sometimes I'm wondering, because now political issues are, or political motivation is a big thing. And sometimes I'm wondering if politics are actually influencing the kind of conclusions that you see out there. So this study is a little older. It's about 5-6 years old study. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I forgot the exact title of it, but I remember the topic very clearly because I wrote a letter to the editor. So what happened is they looked at the vitamin D levels, the circulating vitamin D levels in the human body at Caucasians and African Americans, and they found that the vitamin D, circulating vitamin D level of in African Americans was way lower than that of Caucasians. So it's BMD. Yeah, BMD levels were higher in African Americans than and calcium as well in African Americans than Caucasians. So they're like, oh, you know, we've been telling blacks or African Americans that they're vitamin D deficient, but actually they're not. We should stop telling African Americans they're vitamin D deficient.
So they didn't baseline this with Africans in Africa who presumably get inappropriate amount of ultraviolet light.
Yeah,
that's perhaps they have denser bones and denser marrow to start with, and perhaps the African Americans have less dense than expected, even if it's more dense than the whites. But again, we're entering a politically correct realm where a person doing hard science might not want to take the next step and make a public health proclamation that appears to have some distinguishing between races, which is not politically correct now, even if it might save lives. You mentioned earlier in science that it's time and it's lives. So in order to be politically correct, some statistical number of people have to die. We'll never know which ones, but if we don't give people correct, if you scientists don't give people correct advice, some small percentage of people will, you know, be the person that doesn't make it because that error is allowed to exist.
Yeah.
You'll never establish which person, but as a public health thing, incorrect information is not going to save as many lives as correct information. So it's just kind of a shame that we have to be so politically correct that somewhere someone has to die because we can't say something. Well, scientists. I'm not a scientist. So.
Well, what I found interesting in the study is that this study shows you an amazing example of evolution adaptation in the African American population, because they've been in the U.S. for, I don't know, some of them they've probably been there for 300 years or so, right? Maybe even more. And during this time, they had to evolve and adapt to the lack of sunlight that they had in a sub-Saharan environment, right? I mean, some of them live in Seattle, right?
Sure.
And
Seattle, so they don't all have rickets.
Yeah, well, Seattle is even cloudier than many other places where you get pretty harsh winters, right? So, unfortunately, what I think they should have done is look at the other diseases or all the diseases that are affected by vitamin D levels.
Comorbidity.
Yeah. all the vitamin.
So you're saying that they just picked one thing that would let them
picked
out?
Up,
they said bone
calcium
marrow density,
and BMD.
and so it's a hand waving proof.
Yeah, because calcium level and BMD levels are normal or higher than in Caucasians. Then, you know, we've been wrongly declaring blacks vitamin D deficient. But
Their
why not?
study data, my understanding from what you said earlier, their study data was entirely consistent with the idea that black people were vitamin D deficient.
Mhm.
But then their interpretation of their own data is, we're not going to go there.
Yeah, we're not
Something
going to go
like
there because calcium levels and BMD levels are
But they
fine.
might have pulled that out of a hat so that
Yeah.
they're finding their data stands and other people can draw correct conclusions, but they're not going to get themselves in the crossfire.
But here's the thing. They haven't looked at neurodegenerative diseases in blacks, which are way higher than in whites. And what's interesting,
That
it
does
comes at
sound
an earlier
like
age.
yeah.
It comes at an earlier age. Now, another thing that I've noticed, just by looking around, reading the news, I haven't really looked at, and there's probably
Not
not that many
areas,
studies. No,
yeah.
there's actually no studies that actually done this to look at white athletes and black
You
athletes.
know who has this data and probably won't release it? The U.S. Army has this data. They have the
They
data
might,
on health for comparable age and fitness cohorts of people of different races. But
Yeah.
again, very sensitive material.
Mhm.
So what you gonna do? I'm sorry, I kind of interrupted you.
No, that's fine.
Not sure where I was going with that.
Mhm. Well, I think we're trying to look at this discrepancies and discrepancies. I've been reading. Sometimes you read the news and you're like, oh, this black athlete died or came down with this disease or this and that and the other, and you look at statistics, and that's perhaps because at this point there seems to be like more black athletes than there are whites.
Oh, that's
so
a point.
That might be another issue.
Yeah.
So maybe that's
It's,
my.
and it could be anecdotal. The
Yeah,
total
yeah.
number of black athletes is higher.
But it seems like, from what I've seen, is that black athletes seem to deteriorate in health much quicker than white athletes.
This could all be vitamin D.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, they haven't looked at a whole series of other factors that
Yeah.
are produced by sunlight.
So
Because vitamin D is like one of the factors
interesting. It's
That's-
not everything.
that's important for your health. But then you have endorphins. You have the circadian rhythm. You have so many things that, and in some ways, UV light affects your genes, and so many other important.
I recently came across the claim on the internet. Dr. Rhonda Patrick, Find Your Fitness. She worked with Bruce Ames, so she's somewhat credible in nutrition. She was saying that vitamin D influences 20% of the human genome.
Yeah.
So 20% of
Yeah.
human genome. So it's actually a matter of great interest if the rate of disease among black people is higher than white people, and vitamin D might be deficient. We have a tendency, perhaps, to now we're going into social commentary, for which I perhaps owe an apology, but we're going to blame the white population for everything negative that happens to the black population. If that's our go-to explanation, then we may overlook scientific information that could actually help people.
Yeah, I've read a comment by a doctor saying that it's very difficult for me to tell a black person, hey, you need 5 or 6 times more exposure to sunlight or to UV light than a light skin or a white person. And the thing is, that's another problem is we are becoming a more indoor species, right? So we used to be outside, we used to be out in sunlight, we used to live in different areas of the world, and we evolved based on our exposure to sunlight. But the good thing is we have technology. We have artificial UV light now, UVB light, And the good thing about it is you can control the emission rate, you can control the time, you can control a whole bunch of features on those machines, UV light producing machines, and you don't have to get you don't have to get UV. Sorry, you don't have to get
vitamin D. You don't need dietary vitamin D as a supplement.
That's right. But you
human
can all
beings
these
didn't
other
evolve to
factors.
only eat mushrooms.
Right. So you don't have to get genetic mutations from exposure to UVC and UVA and stuff like that, because those are the two that, when you expose to sunlight, causes most of the problems and skin burn. UVB light is the one that's the most beneficial for you.
I see a product endorsement in your future. maybe you should let people know what would be a useful vitamin
Yeah,
D
that's okay if you're black
machine.
and you live in Seattle.
Yeah, maybe
Use a UVB light machine.
maybe you could tell us about it. I fear the sun here, and we're in a tropical area, and I'm of Irish descent. If I go out in the sun, I'll get skin cancer.
Right.
But if I get no sun exposure, 20% of my genome won't be activated.
People like me and you are fine because we come from our genes evolved in a place where there was a lot less sunlight and radiation than it is in Taiwan. So we're fine.
So you think the
can get
brief,
enough.
large exposures are enough for us?
Yeah,
for
for
vitamin
us,
D?
yeah, just walking around with no sunscreen, sun lotion, and
Motorcycle.
no umbrella. Yeah, we probably get enough vitamin D. But what do you do with the black guy that goes and lives in Seattle? His genes evolved in sub-Saharan
So
Africa.
we shouldn't be so politically correct that we can't
No,
can't
and
tell
that's
people
the
how they
problem.
can help themselves
And the doctor
watch
said
them die
the
prematurely and suffer.
The doctors say, we need to be able to tell people with more melanin in their skin, hey, you need to get more UVB light exposure, and they shouldn't freak out. Oh, what are you trying to say? That
Well, maybe it's not them freaking out. So I remember a recent reference, and our intention is not always to go political,
Mhm.
but everything has been politicized. So that's not necessarily on us, but the most hypersensitive and reactive group in America is Antifa, and it's a bunch of college-educated white people.
Yeah.
They're
they're probably gonna be the one.
reactionaries.
Well, how
They
can
are
you? How
quite
can you?
reactionary.
Yeah,
They will not tolerate dissent.
They're probably going to tell doctors and scientists, like, how can you tell black people to go and get more sunlight? This is racial. This is racism.
Right.
It's just stupid because
Maximizing people's
you're
health.
trying to make people healthier, and then you're wondering, like, why almost all the other ethnic groups, like Asians and whites and lighter skinned people, outperform the blacks. And might this be an issue? Might this be a problem?
Being unhealthy has gotta.
Because
gotta be
sunlight
wrong.
does a lot of wonders, and if you don't have it, or if you move to an area or location where you don't have much of it, you definitely need to make up for it, because this is what your genes dictate. This is what your body needs, to have a certain amount of health factors and vitamin D and.
So it sounds like low-hanging fruit for improving health. So people who can't get outside can plug in a light bulb of some kind and take care of this problem?
Not a light bulb. You need to have a certain type of.
Some emitter of some kind?
Yeah, it has to be
Close
UVB. It has to be UVB.
Does it look like a
specific.
heat source or something?
It looks pretty much like one of those.
And you need your eyes,
Neons.
little goggle things, or
Not really. I mean, the UVB sources are actually not the
so the tanning
bandwidth.
booth.
The bandwidth is
The
yeah,
tanning
the tanning
booth
booth.
is different stuff. It includes
it's-
C or
yeah.
A or
Usually the tanning booths, I
or
believe they
people
do
put
have.
this on just
They
to
do
avoid-
have UVB light emitting diodes, But here's the thing, going back to our issue and the study, is now you've got a bunch of people saying, oh, we don't need to actually have that much vitamin D because look, we got research here in a very respectable journal which says that we don't need it. So I've written a letter to the editor, but they can only accept so many letters, and obviously, there's probably people that have better connections with the New England Journal of Medicine that got their letters accepted. But they also made some good points that those researchers ignored many of the other issues.
So
with the vitamin D.
comorbidity,
Comorbidity, like especially neurodegenerative diseases.
Neuro
This happens a lot in
a lot of people have them.
older blacks. Yeah, but if you look at the ratio among
It happens at earlier ages.
that too, and then if you look at the percentage that happens in the black populations versus white and Asians, because Asians, many of the
Lighter skin, yeah.
East Asians, they have light skin. You're gonna find a very disproportionate amount in the black population. So
So it's,
that's already there, right? And on top of that, now you get the study, which encourages people, people that read stuff like that, or researchers and doctors, to not worry about it. To like, hey, don't worry about it. You don't need to. Blacks don't need to have the same level of vitamin D, circulating vitamin D in the blood as whites. So, you know that there's existing problems there. You know that they're suffering from cancer in much higher percentages than whites and Asians. And it's not only diet.
right.
And because there's lots of black people that eat healthy and they
white
exercise.
people don't,
Yeah, and there's a lot of Caucasian Asians that don't, but you see a very disproportionate amount of cancer rates and neurodegenerative diseases. And
So it's low-hanging fruit. It would be easy to implement. There's almost no downside. Toxicity is practically no issue.
yeah,
If you did it with a UVB source, the body would regulate the amount it makes by
Yeah.
itself.
yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't even need blood tests.
Yeah, it would be
And
much-
Yeah, you can't talk about it.
It would be much better than vitamins because you can actually intake too much vitamin D, but with UVB light exposure, your body has mechanisms that will stop producing too much vitamin
I'm
D.
gonna go buy one of these things. You have
Yeah.
to tell me about
Yeah,
it.
actually, they're actually very, very cheap.
Can I get one on Amazon?
Or
can you get them in Taiwan?
You can go to a dermatologist, and here, you pay $100 to see the dermatologist, and then you say, hey, I just want some UVB light exposure, and they'll put you in one of those booths, tanning booths, and they'll switch the dial to UVB light, and then you get your vitamin D, and you get all those health factors that you need. And I think UVB light exposure, this is going to be, if we're going to live healthier, especially those of us that have darker skin pigmentation or more melanin in our skin, it's going to be more or less like a vaccine in the future because, I don't go outside very much, but I know that I need my UVB light exposure. And I do feel better when I'm out without my shirt on. And I try to do that from time to time. And then I know during the winter months when I don't have the chance to do that, that's why you get sick more often. That's why you don't feel as well. You can't sleep as good. So there's all these things that are very important. But going back to the studies, sometimes you get studies like this that are published in a very high impact factor journal. And because that happens, everybody tends to be like, oh, it's a study published in a very high impact factor journal, so I should really trust it, when you actually shouldn't. Because sometimes, researchers make mistakes. They can get very good results, but they can misinterpret their findings. And this can happen sometimes. It doesn't happen very often, but in this situation, I'm pretty sure just from the letters to the editor that I read, and from my own understanding and my research, UVB light exposure and vitamin D, this is a no-brainer. I mean, this totally went the wrong way.
I'm going to have to get some equipment for this.
Yeah.
What else is going on? Again, I'm not a scientist, so my education is from YouTube. And again, citing the great Dr. Rhonda Patrick, and I have no idea what she has published or where, if anything. But she went on a rant about how there's been an anti-vitamin pushback from doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Even multivitamins. They're saying, you don't even need a multivitamin. And she went into all the ways she thought that this was flawed, and all the ways that she thought that the meta-studies that were quoted had rejected supporting evidence and emphasized evidence that supported some pre-existing bias, and that in addition the studies themselves were often flawed in terms of whether they took serum levels of vitamins before supplementation, after supplementation, whether they had even moved the base levels. So, and also there were issues of compliance, but she sees a large pushback against the idea of telling people to take their vitamins. And yet apparently there's all kinds of data that people don't have enough of many common vitamins, and probably they would be better off with supplementation. So there seems to be a pushback against supplementation.
Yeah, and I remember it just came to me, the name of the researcher was Powe, P-O-W-E, and yeah, that was the name of the researcher. And I think yeah, they had about 700 citations. So I'm wondering, like, what are people citing?
The data?
Their mistake, their good findings that, BMD levels and calcium levels are higher. I think that's an excellent finding, and that completely shows that there's still a lot of evolution going on. So I think this study, it's amazing. I mean, it brought up so many interesting and so much good support that there's great evolution going on in the human species.
Even now,
yeah. And I mean, there's nothing you can take away from them. But to say that, blacks or African Americans in the U.S. are totally okay because we found that their BMD and calcium levels are just great.
But that's based against white people.
I don't think that holds water because
not a great baseline.
They have all these other problems that you're not accounting for, like higher cancer ratios. And vitamin D and sunlight is very important. We have a lot of evidence to show that cancer rates or cancer prognosis and occurrence is highly influenced by the amount of vitamin D and the sunlight exposure that you get.
So one could infer that in many different ways one could come to the conclusion that black people are not getting the vitamin D they should. So just throwing out bone marrow density and calcium is not necessarily doing anyone a favor.
Yeah.
You also wonder the financial incentives for the medical community to not have to prescribe vitamins and not have to do blood tests and so on. And what a great labor-saving device. Don't worry about your vitamins.
Yeah.
Go eat at McDonald's.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to point out some of the issues with expert opinions, publications, how certain studies can influence the outcome of health. Because imagine what this, we already are suffering from not enough sunlight exposure and sufficient vitamin D. Now you throw the study on top of all this and, okay, I guess it doesn't really make that big of a difference, right?
It's
vitamin D deficiency.
People looking for
when it makes all the
difference. Yeah, complacency. You don't have to do anything.
So we hope to continue on this interesting and important topics in the future. We want to thank you for being with us, and please comment and tell us your opinions and suggest topics if you like. And please don't forget to subscribe, and your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you again, and see you next time.